And thank you all for coming. I know Riyadh is a tough city. It's a very crowded city. Too many traffic in Riyadh, but I'm glad that we're still only 15 minutes late from the time that we have agreed. You know, it reminds me when I'm in Milan, it takes more time than the 15 minutes sometimes when it is busy. But at the same time, it's wonderful and a great pleasure to welcome you all. And we're very happy to have you all and to have our guest here. I'd like to welcome our, of course, our speaker, Mr. Federico, and at the same time, also I'd like to welcome all the good friends here that we have, Mr. Luca Miraglia, and the two good ambassador friends, the Italian ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and also to the EU ambassador to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Thank you for coming. I know you have too many delegations in Riyadh nowadays. It's a bit hectic beginning of the year, but thank you for coming and joining us this evening. We're all looking forward to listen to our great, good speaker tonight. He's a very famous journalist. In fact, a friend of mine, you want to describe him to make it easy to understand who is he. He said he's like Muhammad Hassanain Haikal in Egypt. Haikal in Egypt, he was the most famous journalist. He said for in Italy, he's the Haikal of Italy. So at least, you know, to compare, you know, to say who is he in terms of that. He has an outstanding international experience, of course, and the geopolitical issue. He's been traveling the world, covering many areas, including US, China, Europe, and we're very delighted to have you with us here. And before I give you the floor, the ambassador, I think, would like to have a quick comment. You know, so thank you, ambassador.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sager. I would be really very brief, but I would like really to thank you very much to give us the possibility to host this roundtable. And I would like also to thank Dr. Rampini. I know that he arrives in Saudi from 2 weeks now, and I think that you are doing a very interesting job. Thank you also to Ambrosetti. I hope that this is only the first step of a more close collaboration between Ambrosetti and the Gulf Center. We are waiting for you, Dr. Sager, in Italy in May, and also in February. And thank you also to all the guests that have accepted this invitation. And I don't want to take more time, and I will very much.
Can you hear me? Okay, yeah. So first of all, I want to thank very, very warmly the Chief Executive of the Gulf Research Center, Dr. Sager, for his hospitality. I'm really deeply honored for this invitation. It's a pleasure and a privilege for me to speak in such an important think tank. I cannot salute and greet all of you personally, but certainly the ambassador, His Excellency, Mr. Cantone, the ambassador of my country of origin, Italy, although I have become also a US citizen. And what I would say the ambassador of the European Union, who represents the institution I was born into, because as a child, I grew up in Brussels. My father was one of the very, very first civil servants in what at that time was called still the European Community, not yet the European Union. So I am really a child of Europe. Dr. Sager also has presented me in such generous terms. I would just add, for those of you who don't know me, I am a journalist, yes. I've been, for most of my life, a foreign correspondent, covering global issues in several European capitals, Paris, Brussels, then San Francisco, where I was the first and only Italian journalist to open a bureau at the time of the first internet revolution, at the turning of the millennium. Then from San Francisco, I jumped on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, and I opened a bureau in China, in Beijing, where I lived for 5 years during the Hu Jintao presidency, a very different China from today. And then I came back to the United States, this time as a White House correspondent. I've been covering 3 presidents and their trips abroad and their summits, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. And I mentioned this because it was with Donald Trump in 2017 that I visited for the first time your country. It was an interesting trip, very interesting, especially for the foreign policy of the Trump administration. But I mentioned this because the Saudi Arabia I am visiting now is so different. It really gives me the idea of the pace of change in your country, which is astonishing. It's surprising, and I hope that for the Italian-Saudi relationship that you follow and lead so well, Mr. Kamel, it will be really a great opportunity. So I will try to stick to the title of my presentation, what has made the KSA more relevant for the rest of the world. I summarize it in 8 points, and I'll try to be very brief because there will be a discussion, of course. First of all, the war in Ukraine. It severed our decades-old links to Russia, or dependency on Russia, for our fossil energy supplies and other raw materials and commodities. It's been a counter-shock, symmetrical and opposite to the one in 1973-79. 50 years ago, we had to turn to Russia after the OPEC oil embargo linked to the Yom Kippur War. After February 2022, European countries had to turn around again, this time the other way, back to the Middle East and especially the Gulf region. At the same time, the war in Ukraine challenged the most extreme, radical, and naive environmentalist views about a fast and total decarbonization. It was a reality shock. Second point, and similarly, the pandemic and the new Cold War between West and China, with all the disruption in supply chain, have fostered a new interest in some Middle Eastern countries as potential partners in the so-called friendly shoring and de-risking of manufacturing. This dovetails with your industrialization agenda in the KSA Vision 2030. Number 3, a renewed interest on our part towards Africa, especially for its abundance in natural resources, calls for partnerships with actors that have already been investing there, like the KSA, and for political and cultural reasons are more welcomed in Africa than Western countries. And I was very lucky to be here at the invitation of Ambassador Cantone during the forum on the future of mineral resources. I really had a very direct impression of how many African countries were represented here through their leaders. Number 4, the geopolitical innovation of the Abraham Accords, and I was at the White House when they were signed, as a precursor to a more general détente between Arab countries and Israel, seemed to reduce the risks of instability and conflict, fostering a climate more favorable to an inflow of foreign investments. Unfortunately, this scenario, as you very well know, has changed dramatically after the October 7th Hamas attack. And I will elaborate on this later. Number 5, Vision 2030, and what we could call the MBS effect, my own interpretation. This has forced several changes in the perception of the KSA. I'm a journalist, I deal with perceptions. My job here, I will be very frank with you, my mission here is about changing the perception of the KSA among my own audiences in Western countries. So these changes are still ongoing, incomplete, and prone to backlashes. On a more profound level, Saudi Arabia has ceased to be associated with Islamic fundamentalism. Changes in the status of women have had an impact. This is one of the reasons why I always travel with my wife. She is very sensitive. The expectation that the kingdom might become almost as cosmopolitan and secular as Dubai or Qatar has triggered a new interest towards this country. Then there is all the dynamism in terms of business opportunities, big projects from renewable energies to urban development. Yesterday I was in Neom. The new vocation for tourism and sustainability, the generational change, not only in the leadership, but in the workforce. I will elaborate a little bit on this further on. Number 6, the issue of democracy and human rights has become more divisive inside Western countries, inside our own countries. Speaking broadly, and I simplify, of course, leftist parties and green parties tend to advocate for a foreign policy based on values, and often they do so in a very radical and rigid manner. Conservative and right-wing parties prefer a realpolitik based on interests and balance of power. Because many Western countries seem shifting to the right nowadays, I expect the relations with the KSA to improve. Number 7, the geopolitical posture of the KSA has increased its relevance. As seen from the US, where I am based, 2 recent developments are a source of anxiety. Seen from China or Russia, they are an opportunity. One such development is the growing alignment between the KSA and Russia inside OPEC+. The convergence on energy pricing strategy is even more worrying than the refusal of the KSA to adopt and enforce sanctions against Moscow, insofar as the refusal of these sanctions is common among the countries of the so-called Global South. The other preoccupation is the possibility that the KSA would become a member of the BRICS club. US foreign policy makers are afraid that China is transforming the BRICS club into an anti-Western organization. Talks of de-dollarization, although inconclusive, are seen as part of the same grand scheme nurtured by the Chinese leadership. China's role in fostering a diplomatic normalization between the KSA and Iran has been praised for its positive outcome, but it has increased the suspicion that Beijing is trying to tow away Saudi Arabia from its traditional alliance with the US. Number 8, the Gaza war and the Red Sea turmoil, ongoing, unfortunately, have had contradictory effects. On the one hand, they have strengthened the perception of Saudi Arabia as a major regional power, an indispensable actor for stabilization. Any solution to the Palestinian issue by whomever advocated always involves a role for the KSA, political, financial, maybe even military role. The US, the European Union, China are all on the same page on this. There is no future peace plan for the Middle East without a robust Saudi involvement. At the same time, this crisis, and I'll be very frank on this with you, this crisis has seemed to confirm that Saudi diplomacy often punches below its weight. Saudi diplomacy is called upon and it is involved in all negotiations, but it doesn't seem to be at the forefront of efforts for a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It doesn't seem to have a proactive role and to take the lead to solve this tragic mess. As a security provider in this area, the KSA wasn't able to defeat the Houthi militia insurgency. Today's turmoil in the Red Sea has forced the US to intervene militarily against the Houthis in a region where the Saudi could be expected to be the major security provider. I know that these remarks can irritate the Saudis, who remember how they were pressured by the international community, including the US, to end their military action in Yemen. I'm aware of that. Nonetheless, it is a sign of vulnerability when you need an external intervention to try to secure the freedom of navigation and the liberty of commerce in your own backyard. Also, there have been multiple intelligence failures before the Hamas attack of October 2023. The Israeli failure has been exposed first and foremost, the US failure too. But one must wonder why other actors in the region were not adequately alerted to the fact that Iran and Hamas would do anything in order to derail the ultimate Israeli-Arab normalization. So now I've ended my 8 points on the relevance of Saudi Arabia to the rest of the world. Let me add just a few remarks, maybe more anecdotal, on the current business climate before turning to the discussion. In Western countries, there is a disconnect between the mainstream media narrative about Saudi Arabia and the business community. Most media cling to stereotypes, are little aware of the progress made even on human rights, and treat the Jamal Khashoggi assassination as the ultimate reason to discard what I called the MBS effect. The business community has the opposite approach. I noticed it very clearly in my own country when I took part in the Ambrosetti Villa d'Este Cernobbio summit last September, where the Saudi Minister for Investment was really the center of the attention. And a few days later, the same European House-Ambrosetti organized a forum on the Saudi-Italian economic partnership in Milano, and it was a huge success, beyond expectations. The crowd and the excitement among Italian businessmen attracted by the event were similar to a rock concert atmosphere. In my meetings and interviews with the Western and Saudi business community here in Riyadh in the last days, I feel today the same optimistic atmosphere that I felt 20 years ago in China when I lived there. I sense the same can-do attitude, the optimism, the confidence that everything is possible in this country, the belief that the future is being built here, whereas the West is in decline. It is very exciting. I am excited. But I have also some issues with an excess of optimism. Let me start with a very down-to-earth remark. Unreasonable pricing can be a symptom of irrational exuberance. That was a term invented by Alan Greenspan when he was the Federal Reserve Chairman. Irrational exuberance. Feverish speculation. It can lead to a bubble and ultimately to the burst of the bubble. This is especially true in the tourist industry. I don't think it is normal that the same hotel room would cost more in Riyadh than in Manhattan, Venice, Florence, Rome, Paris, London, you name it. And quality doesn't necessarily come with price. Beware of bubbles. This is probably true for some wages too. The opening of Saudi Arabia to the world is an important factor in changing its perception. So be careful how you handle this opening. Opening cannot happen only through overpriced Armani boutique hotels and other 7-star resorts. Also, you need to properly train your workforce in the tourist industry so they acquire an adequate know-how and will satisfy the high expectations you create. Another worry, a bit more complicated, is what I call the demographic leverage. I use this in exactly the same meaning as the financial leverage. The Saudi boom is based on a ratio of foreign workforce, which is by no means unique in the Gulf area, but nonetheless, it is unique if compared to the rest of the world. No such thing ever happened in East Asia during their early or later economic miracles, from Japan to South Korea to China itself. Immigration has ultimately proved that it can be a destabilizing force in most, if not all, Western countries. It's one of the reasons why Donald Trump may be once again my president. Your country may be an exception, like Dubai or Qatar, but sometimes exceptions are only temporary. A more immediate concern is the geopolitical environment. China was allowed 30 years of tremendous economic growth, also thanks to an exceptionally benign geopolitical climate. When the harmonious symbiosis with America ended, the Chinese boom also came to an end. Finally, don't bet against America. Today, it looks doomed. I know, I live there, in the middle of the political chaos, disenchantment, polarization, culture wars. Tomorrow, we will have the Iowa caucuses, starting the primary season, and we will see if the Donald Trump lead among Republican candidates will be confirmed. More on that, if you wish, we can discuss the electoral. That will be one of my main businesses in 2024, will be covering with my columns the elections in the United States. By the way, I mentioned that I traveled with Donald Trump on my first trip here 7 years ago, exactly. But America looked even worse than this in the 60s and 70s, only to rebound in the 80s. As the investor Warren Buffett famously said, all those who have bet against America have lost, and lost big. So finally, before embracing the new conventional wisdom that says that the West is dead and the East is rising, look carefully at all the problems that have been accumulating in China. I can elaborate on this too, if you wish. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I think you have touched on so many important points, and there is two ways. Either we start asking, giving the floor to the other, or I start with my questions. I think I'll start with my question, which is divided to 4 segments. Number 1 is the crisis on the Ukrainian side. Is that going to continue as it is? Are we going to witness a status quo situation, or are we going to witness a Russian military defeat, or is the other scenario will be, a sort of additional support coming from the US, the European, to make more prolongation, on the crisis. Still, because the Ukrainian crisis is quite interesting to see. The Gaza, of course, crisis have taken over a lot of the shadow in that one. But on the Gaza side, when we move to Gaza, I think there are 3 issues very important nowadays to look at Ukraine, what is happening there, Gaza, and see what is the latest development and the US position in that crisis. And third, of course, is the Red Sea security and what we have been witnessing the last couple of days. Those 3 are primarily an important, and then if you look at with all the economics matters that relate to it, the European Some will argue that they are the biggest loser on the Ukrainian crisis. The Arab countries are a big loser, of course, in the Gaza crisis. Oil producer and shipping company and trading is the big loser on the Red Sea. So there are too many losers, very few winners in that one. Maybe we start with this question, and then I will open the floor to our colleagues.
So you have raised such important topics that I will just give you very, very quick and limited answers. But I will start with Ukraine, of course. I would say this. 1 year ago at this time, when some of the most authoritative military leaders in the United States spoke about a Korean scenario, they were considered as being excessively pessimistic. So what is a Korean scenario? Because a Korean scenario means the conflict becomes a frozen conflict. Nobody really wins. There is a status quo that is accepted, not a status quo that is legitimized by any peace treaty. It's just a de facto status quo. And that's it. And the war can be frozen and still potentially an ongoing war for the next decades. You know that in between North Korea and South Korea, a war was fought starting in 1950, ending in 1953, but ending only in the sense of the fighting. In fact, there is no peace treaty there. So when then Chief of Joint Staff at the Pentagon said that this is a probable outcome, he was considered as being almost on the side of Putin. Nowadays, it has become almost an optimistic scenario. If we could accept a frozen conflict where everything stays where it is now, maybe the Ukrainian would be lucky, because the conflict has taken another turn favorable to Putin, and certainly the Gaza situation has played a major role in distracting the resources of America. When I speak of resources, it's political attention, political focus, intelligence attention, and the military resources. The military resources of America are not infinite. And we have really, for instance, in the ammunition manufacturing, a real crisis. So that's my first point. Korean. Let's embrace the Korean scenario now, because it's probably the least worst among the scenarios for Ukraine. So another remark that will cover all your other questions, going from the Israeli situation to the Red Sea. And I will end my trip in Saudi Arabia in Jeddah with meetings with the Port Authority to understand better all the threats to maritime business. You know, isolationism is a real option for America. Don't undervalue this. Isolationism is probably the most true tradition that links to the foundation of the American Republic. The founding fathers of America flew from the religious wars in Europe, and they promised they would never go back, that they would never be involved in European conflicts, or for that matter, in the rest of the world. It's a very, very strong tradition. So Donald Trump has not invented isolationism. He has re-established a narrative that has been always very strong, especially among conservatives. Remember that the Republican Party didn't want to enter neither the First nor the Second World War. They didn't want. And the pacifist left was on the same position. So it is nowadays for the average American that will vote, participate in the Iowa caucuses tomorrow or in the New Hampshire primary a few days later, the idea that America has no business to do in Ukraine, it does no vital interest there, nor in the Middle East. They don't need oil anymore. There's a substantial self-sufficiency in fossil energy, whereas there are crises, ongoing crises, much nearer to the average American, like Ecuador, Central America, failed states, a flow of illegal immigrants, crime, drug trafficking. Let's take care of our own home. Let's put order in our own affairs. That resonates very much. So once America would embrace an isolationist foreign policy, which I consider not to be a far-fetched scenario, then I will tell you, the famous American saying, be careful what you wish for, because your wishes could come true. There are so many people, so many nations, so many leaders going from Xi Jinping to Pope Francis in Rome that don't like the Americans and don't like the Americans to be everywhere in the world, where maybe one day their wishes will come true. And then we will see in what kind of chaotic world we can live. Who will take care of security of navigation in the Red Sea, for instance?
Please, Faisal. Just if you want to introduce yourself or introduce him, Faisal Abbasi is editor-in-chief of Arab News.
Hopefully the Federico Rampini of Saudi Arabia one day. So thank you so much for this excellent, I believe it was a very refreshing, laser-sharp description of how Saudi Arabia is perceived. I second your thoughts, particularly on the business aspect of how investors have seen. I was just with the Minister of Mining, who you probably met at the Mining Forum, and he was telling me about how when he first attended Davos about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a lot of skepticism about, can you really do what you're saying you're going to do in Saudi Arabia, and how now the mood has shifted to fear of missing out. So on that front, I couldn't but agree with you. I have 2 points that I would like to raise where I would like to challenge you a little bit. One is regarding Gaza, and then the second one about the perception about betting against the United States. In terms of Gaza, me and Dr. Sager, we were together with the foreign minister in a briefing just before the tour that Saudi Arabia led with Islamic and Arab ministers all the way from China to the US. And from that briefing and from what I know about the meetings that happened particularly in the States, actually, we believe that the kingdom has done a lot of effort, diplomatic efforts, to try to get what we believe the West to come down from the tree that they have climbed on, which is we need to find a solution on this. At no point there was any attempt to justify what happened on October 7th, but clearly the way Israel has approached the crisis or the retaliation isn't solving the problem. And I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about what more can the kingdom do. Personally, I'm with Tom Friedman, who published an article saying the solution is actually that the US must give some tough love to Israel and give them honest advice that whatever they're doing is not doing. And of course, we all, just to go back to Hamas, I think anybody who's a Hamas sympathizer must be held accountable. But if we're going to do that, then the first person would be Benjamin Netanyahu, because his policy for the past 16 years have been empowering Hamas and dismantling the Palestinian Authority. The second point, which is more concerning for me, and with your European and US kind of background, I'm very nervous when I hear the perception that the kingdom is betting against the United States. Just again, perhaps your take or advice on what to do when, when Winston Churchill says the Americans will do the right thing after they've tried everything else. So when it came to the Houthis, we were telling the United States back from 2016, this is an evil group. Their slogan is actually death to America, not death to Saudi Arabia. During President Obama's desperate attempts to appease the Iranians at the time, he ignored 3 attacks on the US Navy in the end of 2016. Even the negotiations on the nuclear issue, it's very elementary or very basic to try to tell the Americans, you cannot have sunset clauses and you cannot allow the Iranians to decide which areas you search in and which areas you don't. Up to the point where, in a rather, I don't want to sound sarcastic, but it's amazing that in 4 years' time, the Houthis have went from being listed as unlisted as terrorists to listed as terrorists. And perhaps this brings me to the point why perhaps the perception of betting against the United States. When our biggest ally or most important ally withdraws the Patriot missiles, batteries from Europe are a defensive technology, and delist the Houthis. A government's first role or task is to protect its people. So what we had to do is scramble to get replacements. That means talking with China. Eventually, we got it from the Greeks. But I wonder whether or not that aspect is absent from the narrative in America, because it was not betting against the United States as well as much as reacting to the withdrawal, for example, of the Patriot missiles and doing what we needed to do to protect our people. Thank you so much.
Okay, it's a very challenging discussion, and I'm very impressed, and I'm very glad I'm here, in fact. So on Gaza, I completely agree with you that Israel is not solving the issue. I think that probably a majority of Americans today believe that the United States should apply tough love to Israel. The problem is it working? First of all, applying tough love to Benjamin Netanyahu is not enough anymore. Now we have a problem. I think that after October 7, we have a problem with the Israeli public opinion, not just with Netanyahu. It's not just one leader or even one right-wing governmental coalition. Is that the events of October 7 have somehow radicalized parts of the Israeli public opinion. So it's tough love that has to be administered on a very large scale. A democratic president is not necessarily the most effective. Barack Obama had a terrible relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu to no effect. The results were minimal. So maybe it's one of the many paradoxes that you need a very good friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, like Donald Trump at the White House, to reach some results. I don't know. I'm not sure. But, there's some very counterintuitive truth when Donald Trump says right now during the electoral campaign, when I was president, Putin didn't invade Ukraine. When I was president, Hamas did not attack Jewish people. unfortunately, it's true. I don't like Trump personally. I don't like Trump, but at the same time, you have to accept the facts. So what can I go very quickly among many of your remarks? I just share and agree with. What can Saudi Arabia do more? I'm here. I'm really thinking. I will apply the same concept of tough love, not just tough love towards Hamas, but more generally. I think that just maybe, the kingdom could have a more um, assertive role in building a new Palestinian leadership. We know that the current options are totally unacceptable, useless to the Palestinian people first and to the international community. Let's not consider Israel, but neither Hamas nor the authority are legitimate enough. But Saudi Arabia has at least the economic, financial clout, the prestige, the authority that could be spent as political capital to build very quickly, as quick as possible, a new leadership for the Palestinian people. We need it. So all the mistakes that Americans have made in the Middle East regarding, you mentioned Iran. I think I agree with you. You know, we are in the process of re-examining all the foreign policy of Barack Obama, and it's been downgraded severely, very severely, even among Democrats. So going from the so-called Arab Springs to the agreement with Iran, so many things went wrong under Obama, too many. But I really believe that we need your insight, your expertise, for instance, on how to deal with Iran, because we don't know. We don't know. We tried. I mean, under Trump, you had the assassination, the targeted assassination of Soleimani. That was bold, but I don't know that it really stopped anything on the support of Iran to terrorist militias. So I think we really need to listen to you, and hopefully you will give us good advice. What can we do to limit the danger of Iran and the threat? What I would just end with a ironical remark. I'm a little bit skeptical when I hear you using in the same sentence the words China and replacement, because China, yes, they want to replace the United States, but they don't want to be just a junior partner. They won't. At the beginning, they might seem to be very soft in their approach, but I think it will prove to be an exclusive partnership. It will be very demanding. So that I think is a perilous path to go. I understand that you feel frustrated by a number of mistakes made by the Americans, especially on Iran. I mentioned Houthi, so the Yemen issue, all kind of military mistakes. But be very careful before you embrace China, because that's an embrace that is, it's done for the millennia.
With your permission, Doctor, I just have 30 seconds. Just a follow up on that. Yes, we fully agree, and we ended up getting the Patriot missiles from Greece. With regards to China, the relationship, and I fully note your concern, which I'm sure is what's the pulse in Washington. But we have a different relationship with China when it comes to most countries they deal with around the world. Look, take Pakistan, for example. We don't need Chinese aid. We don't need Chinese. So we are the client in this case. So that really brings the relationship into a peer level, not a lackey any level. So that's just an important point to note. On the point of advice, I think the frustration which I've heard from several officials over different years is we actually volunteer the advice, but the problem has always been is that it's not listened to.
Well, I will add to what Faisal said, that our relation to China is a buyer and seller. They are the largest importer from us. We sell them 20% of our oil production. And the trade relation between Saudi Arabia and China today is close to $110 billion. So they are the largest trade partner, more than the whole EU bloc together. So we do want to lose that trade relation, but at the same time, we understand China is not a substitute. It's not a replacement to the US. This is, we understand it very clearly. They are the only one that, in terms of today, our relation still very much linked to the West in general. When we say West, we mean US and to the EU. And neither China or Russia. Russia is a producer of a raw material like us. They have oil and gas and mineral. We have oil and gas and mineral. They're not a substitute. They are not a replacement. But at the same time, why not to give us the liberty to have a balanced relation with everybody? That's what the US refused to understand. That what we would like to do in Saudi Arabia is to have a balanced relation with the US, with the Chinese, with the Russian, with the with the whole world, in that one. They just, it's either with or against. And I remember in the article I published at the Arab News, I stated my story with Secretary Blinken in the Munich Security Forum. When I asked him, I say, listen, we are taking a balanced position in Ukraine. We're against the Russian invasion. We do not accept that one. We support the unity of Ukraine. We supported Ukraine with some financial aids. We have contributed to the release of some of the prisoners. And we are not, and we have voted in the UN against the Russian invasion. But at the same time, we would like to have the liberty to have a balanced relation in terms of we don't need to be in the same bloc where the US brought all the 47 member states to see with them and that against Russia and go and cut our relation because we have interest in the OPEC plus. And his answer to me in record, of course, was there is no balance with aggression. What I'm saying today, can he remember what he said in terms of Gaza? Can he repeat that? Is he going to have a balance when there is an aggression is being conducted against them?